How's it going, guys? My name is Dom, and today I'm going to be showing you how easy it is to create your very own mobile-friendly navigation menu using HTML, CSS, and a tiny bit of JavaScript, all right? So this right here is going to be the finished result. As we can see, we've got a really nice looking navigation menu on the left side. If I was to click away, it's going to collapse. If I was to click in the top left corner again, it's going to come back. Now on mobile, it's going to look like this. As we can see, it is mobile friendly and it still looks really nice. So I'm going to be showing you from start to finish how to create something like this. It's actually really straightforward. And this also includes the bar at the top of the page here, as well as the button and the logo and so on. So we're going to be starting from an empty HTML file. So all of the source code is going to be linked down below if you want to download and follow along. Now heading inside VS Code here, I've got this index HTML with nothing inside of it. I've got an open script tag and a linked CSS style sheet. This style sheet also has nothing inside of it, as we can see. Now, I imagine you guys have a similar setup. If not, make sure to have something like this where you've got your own included CSS style sheet and you should be good to follow along. Also recommend you have a logo ready inside a directory called images as an example. That way you can put it in the top left corner. If you don't wish to use a logo, that's perfectly fine, but the option is going to be there and I'm going to show you how to do it anyway. Okay, now before jumping into the code, I want to show you Google material icons because we're going to be using Google's icon library to give us the hamburger menu. This is going to be linked down below. So this website right here, as we can see, there are many icons to choose from. So we need to actually include this icon library in the web page so we can begin using it. I'll leave a link to this page here also down below, which is the guide for setting it up. So if I head down to setup method 1 using Google Fonts, I'll copy this line of code here and paste it inside the head of my HTML page. And now we can begin to use Google's material icon library. Okay, great. Let's now begin on the HTML, then the CSS, and then lastly the JavaScript to, of course, create this navigation menu. All right. The very first step in the HTML is going to be to simply create a container for the top navigation bar. So we can say here a new div with a class of top-row. My mistake, when I said bar, I actually meant row. So the top row of the web page. Inside this row, there's going to be the icon as well as the company logo, or whatever it might be. Okay, so right here we'll just say button, with a type of button and a class of nav-btn. Now, inside the button, we can now begin to use Google material icons. So let's make the hamburger icon appear inside that button. So going back to this web page, I can do a search for menu and we can see here we have the menu icon. I also apologize for my voice. I'm recovering from a cold, so you might hear a few hiccups here and there. But that's all right. So we can see we have this menu icon. I can now copy this code on the right side to include that on the web page within the button element, just like that. So now if I was to refresh the page, I'll save it first, refresh the page, we get that. So it's not working. Let's try and figure out why. Let's go inside the elements section, verify the icon set is loaded. Yes, it is. Okay, let's keep going and try and figure out why. Okay, my mistake. It's right here. So I'm using -outlined. Let's go back on the Google Material website and we need to change this to be filled instead. And now it's going to update, if I choose it again, to just be material-icons. So let's change this to be dash or simply just material-icons and that's it. And now it's going to work. Back in the browser, refresh, and we get that right there. Cool. Let's move on to the logo. Okay, so let's make a new image tag below the button with a source of images / decode logo.png. Give it an alt text of simply just decode. Let's also give this a class of logo. I'll save this, go back in the browser, and we get something like this. The logo is clearly full size. So we're going to fix that shortly, but for now we can keep that in. Now let's move on to the next part. It's actually going to be the dark overlay, which you may have just noticed. So there's actually two things going on here. You've got the navigation bar on the left side. You've also got the opaque black overlay, which you can see there, the page turns darker. So that's actually a div. Let's create that right now. Go back inside here and make a new div with a class of nav-overlay underneath the top row. Okay, and that's all we need for this. We're going to be using CSS to, of course, make that actually work. And now we can actually create the navigation menu itself. So let's use a nav element here and give it a class of nav. Let's now hop down here, make a new anchor tag. The href is going to be a hash. Obviously, in your case, you're going to want to put your very own or your own href inside there. But also giving this a class of nav-link. There goes my voice again, I apologize. Now, inside the anchor tag, let's give this a text of nav item number 1 and do this a few more times. We can do it 5 times, so 2, 3, 4, and 5. So we have all of the HTML done for the navigation bar. We can now move on to the CSS and, of course, the JavaScript. Now, before jumping into the CSS, I want to quickly show you what the page looks like at the moment. I'll do a refresh and we get, of course, the button, the logo. Scrolling down, we get all of the navigation links right there. So let's now use CSS to convert this right here into this right here. Cool. Let's go back inside VS Code now. Go inside the CSS file and then simply target the body. So the very first step inside the body is going to be to set a CSS property or CSS variable. We can say -- top - row - height and make this 60 pixels as the value. So this right here isn't actually going to do anything. It's simply just declaring a CSS variable and we can use it later on. It's convenient because if you want to have this same value in 2 places or 3 places, you change it once and it updates everywhere. So more on this later. We can hop back down now and give the body a margin of 0 and a margin top of var, then use the top row height. So basically just a 60 pixel margin at the top of the body. This right here is very important because we're saying let's give the top row 60 pixels of space and then begin everything else underneath it. Okay? This right here is going to make a little bit more sense once we get up to that part. So let's keep it there for now. All right. Let's also set the background to be 009578 to make it a nice green as the background. I'll do a refresh and we get this right here. Okay, great. Let's now target the top row. Let's target that class of top - row and give this a position of fixed. Okay. The reason for the fixed position is because we want the navigation, we want the top row to exist even while the user's scrolling down. So the fixed position allows it to float above everything else. And, of course, like I just said, make it visible when the user is even scrolling down. Now, on second thought, I probably could have called this top row the header. I apologize, but it's up to you really. But just know that the top row is, of course, that black bar. Okay, cool. Let's now drop down. We're going to say a top of 0 and a left of 0. So in the top left corner, it's going to be floating. Give this a width of 100% and a height of, once again, that variable top row height. Now, because the top row class is within the body, it can access the parent's variables such as top row height. And you can see here, because of this variable, we're allowed to say 60 pixels here and down here to make it consistent and the same. Let's now save this, go back in the browser, refresh, and we get something like this. So as we can see now, the other content is floating, or it's being moved up, okay? If I was to inspect this, we can see that right there is the top row. So we're forcing the web page content, the nav items, to be pushed down. Now, of course, we're going to be moving these nav items anyway, but imagine this right here was paragraph of text, okay? The text is going to be pushed down below the top row. Let's go back inside here now, set a few more properties, give this a display of flex. We're going to be using a flex box just to give us that nice column layout, and a background of dark gray, just like that. I'll save this, go back, refresh, and we get this right here. Okay, so we can see that usage of flexbox is going to automatically make the image 100% height. Okay, but let's go inside the CSS now and target that logo. We're going to reinforce that height of 100% just to be sure, even though it does it automatically. Okay, as well as a display of block to remove some of the very small space surrounding an image when it's its default display type of inline block, as well as some padding of 8 pixels just to make some space around the image itself in a consistent form. I'll save this, refresh, and we get this right here. Now, there's a problem with the image, and that is it's taking over too much space. So let's try and figure that out right now. That might be due to the height. Let's just get rid of the height real quick. Refresh, and it is. So let's make the height 100%, but also make the box sizing as border box. That way the padding is included in that height. I'll refresh and it should stay the same, and it does. Perfect. Okay. Let's now move on to the logo. Oh, sorry, my mistake. Let's move on to the button itself. So going back inside here, let's target the class of navbtn. Give this a width of, okay, the top row height. So we need the heights of, so I'll say var here, okay? I'll say top row height. So we need the button to be the same height and width. So the height is going to be 100% by default. We can just reinforce it once again, okay? So 100% is going to be 60 because of course it's within the top row, and that's set to 60. So the width and height are the same. So we want a square button, all right? Also going to say here, and align items of center, and a justify content of center, alongside a display of flex. So by using these 3 properties, it means that the icon, the menu icon, is going to be centered vertically and horizontally. I'll save this, go back in the browser, refresh, and we get this right here, a perfectly square icon or button, and a menu icon inside there, perfectly centered horizontally and vertically. Let's also set a background here of none, an outline of none, and a cursor of pointer to give that visual feedback to the user that can actually click on this button. I'll save this, go back, refresh, and we get something like this. Now, we need to also set a border of none on the button to remove that black border. So I'll refresh, and there it goes. And we can now begin to style up the actual button itself, make it a white color instead. Let's go back inside here now. We're going to say nav button and target the span inside there. I'll put a comment to just say styling Google material icons. Okay. So targeting the span, remember the span is the actual icon itself. Okay. So with that span, we're going to be setting a color of white and a font size of 32 pixels. Now I'll save this, go back in the browser, refresh, and we get something like this. Now, on second thought, it might actually be smarter to set the font size based on the navigation height. So let's try that right now. I'll go back inside here. Let's make this 32, instead say calc, and I'll say variable for the top row height divided by 2. So now it's going to be 60 pixels divided by 2, giving us 30. It's going to be very similar to the previous 32, refreshed, and there it goes. So it might be a bit smarter doing that because of course now the size of the icon is going to be determined by this 60 pixels right up here. Okay. We've finished styling up the navigation bar. My mistake, the top row or the header, okay? We can now move on to the navigation bar. So let's go back inside CSS here and target the class of nav. Now, let me remind you what this looks like. We have the top row, which we just styled up, the button, the logo, etc. We have the nav overlay. We're going to be touching on this later on. But of course, we've also got the navigation itself. So the class of nav has 5 anchor tags inside of that with a class of nav link. So let's first target the container. We're going to be setting a variable here for nav width equal to 300 pixels and a position of fixed. Similar to the top row, we want the navigation menu to float above everything else on the page. So of course, a position of fixed is going to let us do that. We'll say a top of 0, a left of 0 for the top left corner, and a width of, using the variable here, nav width, and a height of 100 VH. So this just means 100% of the visible viewport. Okay. Let's make a background here of black. We're going to stop and go back in the browser to investigate our progress. Refresh and we get something like this. All of the nav items are now contained within the navigation menu container, and it's looking pretty good. We've got that 100% viewport height here and that width set. So now we're going to hop down here. We're actually going to come back to the navigation and we're going to just say here to do add transitions. Okay, so going to come back to this very shortly, but now we can hop down and target the class of nav link. So for those links, let's give this a display of block. If I save this and refresh, we can see now they're going to be stacked instead of in line. Okay. Can also say here a font family of sans serif. Of course, you can make this whatever font you like. A font size of 24 pixels, some padding of also 24 pixels, text decoration of none, and a color of white, just like that. I'll save, go back, refresh, and we get something like this. Okay, cool. Let's add some borders to the bottom of these items. So back inside here, we can target nav link, then say colon last child. So any navigation link that is not the last one, okay, we're going to say border dash bottom, 1 pixel solid, and then a dark gray, just like that. Save this back in the browser, refresh, and we get this right here, that very subtle border. We can now apply a hover pseudo class. So let's go back inside here, say navlink colon hover. When hovering over, we can set the background to now be RGBA 255, 255, 255, then say 0.05. So a 5% opaque white is going to brighten up the background when we actually hover over those items. Save this, go back, refresh, and we get that very subtle highlight when hovering over the navigation items or links. Okay, cool. We can now begin to add those transitions to the navigation menu. So back up the top here, by default, the navigation menu is going to be hidden off the side of the page. I'll show you the example from earlier on. As you can see, it's hidden, right? If I click on it, it comes out from the side. So to achieve that, all right, we're going to say navigation, transform, okay? We'll say translate X. This just means move the navigation menu on the X axis, okay? We'll say calc, then we'll say -1 times var nav width, okay? This here is saying move the navigation -300 pixels to the left, okay? Save this, go back in the browser, refresh, and it's gone. Let's make this value something like, let's just make it -290 pixels. Save it, go back. It's now 10 pixels showing. So because the width is equal to the width here, but just negative, it's going to be fully off the side. Okay. Now we're going to say transition transform at 0.25 seconds. This just means, look, whenever the transform property does change, then it's going to do so in a nice smooth animation. So when is this going to change, and when do we trigger the animation? Well, when the navigation menu has a class of nav-open just like that, we're going to push it back to the right side. So we'll say here, transform, translate X. Okay, try again. Translate X and make it 0. It's going to reset that value with a nice smooth transition. Back in the browser, I'll inspect the navigation bar right down here. Okay, I'll say class nav-open, press enter, add that class, bang, it comes forward. So JavaScript is going to be triggering this class change whenever you click on the button in the top left corner. That's how it's going to work, okay? So we're done up here. We can now move on to the navigation overlay, all right? So for the nav overlay class, we'll say here a display of none by default, but I'll just comment this out just for now, okay? We're going to use a position of fixed here in the top left corner, just like that, and a width of 100 VW and a height of 100 VH. This just here makes sure that the overlay takes up the full viewport visible area, okay? A background of RGBA 000, 0.2 for 20% opaque black. And back in the browser here, we have this very subtle black overlay on the page, okay? Let's go back inside here now and set the display to none to remove that by default, because of course, we only want the navigation overlay to display when it's actually opened. I'll refresh and we can see it's back to normal. Cool. The very last CSS rule set here is going to be nav overlay dash open. So much like the nav open, nav overlay dash open, it's going to simply set that display back to block. Okay. Save this, refresh, add the nav overlay dash open class, just like that. Okay. Enter, and it's dark again. So that's how that's going to work. So now we're done with the CSS. This is all done. We can now move on to the JavaScript. The JavaScript for this is going to be really straightforward. So let's head back into the index.html and head down to the script tag. So let's wrap everything inside a curly brace, just like this. Now we can say something like setup navigation bar. Now, you might be wondering, why did I use this block and wrap everything inside of it? Reason is because I don't want to pollute the global scope with constants and so on. And it also makes the code a little bit more easier to read, and it's separate. This part here is just for the navigation bar. So that's why I'm using the block here to simply separate everything out. Now inside here, we can just say a new constant called nav menu equal to document.query selector, then just say a class of nav. Let's do the exact same thing for the nav overlay. We can just say nav-overlay, and lastly the nav button, and we can say nav-btn, just like that. So we've got a reference to all of the important navigation elements. We can hop down here and add some event listeners. So we'll say when the user clicks on the nav button, so add event listener for click, we're going to run this code. So this code is going to grab the nav menu. It's going to say .class list.add. We're going to add the nav open class to the nav menu's class list. The exact same thing goes for the nav overlay, but this one here is going to be for nav-overlay-open instead. I'll save this, go back in the browser, refresh, click on the button, and it opens up. Okay, so now when I click away, I wanted to, of course, hide that navigation menu. Back in the browser, we can do this by simply adding an event to the nav overlay. Nav overlay.addEventListener for the click event is going to say, look, when I click on the nav overlay, we're going to do the exact opposite. We'll copy this code, go back inside here and say remove both the nav open and the nav overlay open. Save this, go back, refresh, and we can see now, click on it, click away, and of course it goes away. So that right there is how to build your very own mobile navigation menu using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Hope you guys enjoyed today's video. Apologies once again for my voice, but I'm recovering, so that's all good. That's it. So have a nice night, and I'll see you in the next video.